Our word of the week is non-record. Records help us document our work. They contain the information we need to serve our customers, support our mission, and understand our history. In the federal government, records are made or received by a federal agency, or someone working on behalf of the agency, in the course of government business. Records belong to the agency, and the amount of time each type of record is kept must be approved by the National Archives. Records come in all kinds of formats, and we need those documents, drawings, maps, databases, videos, and other materials to help us get our work done. But not all the information we work with is a record. We're creating and collecting more information than ever before. In many cases, at least part of the volume that's taking up all that space on our email boxes, networks, and desks is not record material. In the federal government, non-record materials usually fall under one of the following types. Non-record materials fail to meet the general conditions of record status. In other words, they just don't quite rise to the level of a record. I'll give you an example. I received an email message from someone who claims to be a prince in a land far, far away. He says he has a wonderful financial deal for me. He tells me that if I'll just send him all of my money, he can somehow make me very wealthy. Now, if I worked for a federal agency that was investigating this prince and his money-making schemes, the email message might have some value, but I don't, and this message is clearly junk mail. In this case, I have a non-record. In fact, I have a non-record that I'm going to delete right now. Extra copies of documents can also be non-records, especially when those copies are made just for reference purposes. Let's say I have a policy document that explains how to buy a toner cartridge for our office printer. The original copy of that document, the official record, is on file with an office at our headquarters. Right before my printer ran out of toner, I printed out a copy of the document. My printout is a convenience copy of the official policy. I'm using my non-record copy for reference, and as soon as I've figured out the steps and ordered the new toner, I'll be able to recycle my copy of the policy because I won't need it for reference anymore. If you have a reference copy of a document and you're not adding to it or taking action on it, you probably have a non-record copy. Stocks of publications and processed documents are non-records. If your office publishes an annual report or creates a flyer or brochure to give away to visitors, you will want to have a record copy on file to document your work, but those 500 other copies you have stacked on the front desk for people to pick up are non-records. Library and museum material that's used only for reference or exhibit purposes will also fall under the definition of non-record material. For example, your office might purchase some business directories to help you identify companies and groups you need to contact, or you might subscribe to a professional journal so you can stay current on new developments in your field. Those materials are useful and helpful, but they're not documenting government work. They're reference materials, and we'll keep them in our office library until they're no longer needed. Or let's say you establish a display that highlights your agency's history, and you make a copy of the founding documents that established your office. Now, those original documents are records, and they do need to be maintained. In fact, they probably need to be transferred to the National Archives as part of our nation's history. But the copies you made to display in your exhibit are non-record copies. Non-records include things like office supply catalogs, professional and business journals, training catalogs, email announcements, newsletters we receive from other organizations, and other published materials like that. So, to summarize, non-records are things that don't meet the definition of a record, stocks of publications and blank forms, library and museum materials used only for reference or exhibition, and extra copies of documents that are used only for reference. There are some times when things get a little more complex. When you're identifying records and non-records, you need to consider what the information is and how it's being used. Here's an example. There are times when several copies of the same document may all be records. One document could have multiple lives, so to speak. Let's say an engineer is designing a product. She creates a record copy of the drawings and specifications for her project file. The engineer then sends a copy of the specifications to the purchasing department, because purchasing is going to find someone to supply the parts. That department now has its own record, a procurement file, to document the work it's doing as it places orders and spends money. The manufacturing department and the inspector who quality checks the final product may also end up with copies of the specification in their own files. Each of those departments may need to retain its own files for a different period of time, depending on the department's business needs. When we're trying to determine whether something is a record, we need to look at what that item is and how it's being used. If you're not sure about a document, treat it as a record and contact your records liaison, records manager, or records officer. He or she can help you figure it out. In the federal world, non-record materials do need to be managed so they don't pile up and overtake our servers, inboxes, and desktops. When we do need to keep non-records, we want to be sure that they're not intermixed with our official files. That way it's easier to find the information we need and easier to preserve important records for the right amount of time. It's also important to weed out non-record materials that are obsolete or no longer useful. A little regular maintenance can help us keep our networks and offices running more smoothly. If you'd like more information about managing records and non-records, visit us online at archives.gov.